There was an article that was purported to have been written by her in one of the magazine, one of the Star or whatever those terrible things are, in which she made certain assertions and accusations that none of us ever believed a word of it.
There are moments in television history so perfectly constructed, so emotionally complete, that they feel less like a scripted farewell and more like a natural ending to something that was always meant to close exactly that way. The series finale of Happy Days, which aired on May 8th, 1984, was supposed to be one of those moments. After 11 seasons, after more than 250 episodes, after a cultural journey that had taken American families from the sock hops and drive-ins of the 1950s all the way to the social upheavals of the real-world 1970s, Happy Days had earned the right to a dignified, emotional, and permanent goodbye. And for one brief, shining television moment, it got exactly that. Then, almost immediately, the network took it all away. Not through malice, exactly, but through something almost worse, indifference dressed up as scheduling logic. To understand why that single scene, the one that should have closed the curtain forever, matters so deeply, you have to understand what Happy Days actually meant to the people who watched it. This was not simply a sitcom. It was a weekly ritual for millions of American households. Families gathered around their television sets not just to laugh at Fonzie's antics or cringe at Richie Cunningham's teenage stumbles, but because the Cunningham household in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, felt like a second home. Howard and Marion Cunningham weren't just fictional parents. For many viewers who grew up without the warmth, stability, or humor that the Cunninghams radiated, Howard and Marion filled a very real emotional need. When Happy Days finally decided to say goodbye, it wasn't just a show going off the air. For millions of people, it felt like losing a family. The scene at the center of this story belongs entirely to Tom Bosley, the actor who spent 11 years bringing Howard Cunningham to life with a quiet, steady dignity that the louder, flashier characters on the show often overshadowed. Howard Cunningham was never the coolest character in the room. He wasn't Fonzie. He didn't have a catchphrase that children repeated on school playgrounds across the country. He didn't sell lunch boxes or inspire Halloween costumes in the way that Henry Winkler's leather-jacketed icon did. What Howard Cunningham had was something rarer and, in the long run, more enduring, genuine warmth. He was the kind of father that television almost never showed. Not perfect, not infallible, but consistently present, consistently loving, and consistently trying. Tom Bosley played that man with such unpretentious sincerity that it often went unrecognized as acting at all. So when series creator Gary Marshall decided that Howard Cunningham would be the one to deliver the show's final words, and when he further decided that those words would be spoken directly into the camera, directly to the audience watching at home, he was making a choice that went far beyond a creative flourish. He was acknowledging something that television rarely acknowledged in that era, that the people watching were not passive observers. They were participants. They had given 11 years of their lives to this fictional family, and they deserved to be thanked for it. Marshall's instinct was that only Howard Cunningham could carry that weight with the right combination of authority and humility. He was a father of the household, and in a very real sense, he had been the father of the audience's experience too. The decision to have Tom Bosley look directly into the camera and speak to the audience was not made easily or without fierce opposition. In the early 1980s, American network television operated under a set of unspoken but powerfully enforced creative conventions, and one of the most sacred of those conventions was the invisible wall between the world of the show and the world of the viewer. Characters existed in their own reality. The cameras were never acknowledged. The audience was always meant to feel like they were watching something real happening in a real place to real people, not a constructed performance aimed at them. To break that wall, to have a character suddenly turn and speak directly to the people at home, was considered a violation of the basic contract between storyteller and audience. ABC's executives made their position clear in multiple meetings with the production team. Their argument was straightforward, if ultimately misguided. 11 seasons of carefully maintained fictional reality could be undone in a single moment by having a character acknowledge the cameras. All the work that had gone into making the Cunningham household feel authentic, feel lived in, feel real, would evaporate the instant Howard looked into the lens and started talking to the audience. It would remind everyone watching that this had all been performance, and in doing so, It would cheapen the emotional investment that viewers had made over more than a decade. Gary Marshall disagreed, and he disagreed with a confidence that came from understanding his audience in a way that network executives often did not. His argument was essentially the opposite of theirs. The emotional investment that viewers had made in Happy Days was precisely the reason that breaking the fourth wall would work. Audiences didn't need to maintain the illusion that the Cunninghams were real in order to feel connected to them. They already knew the show was a show. What they needed in that final moment was for the people who had made it to turn around and say, "We see you, we know you were here, and we are grateful." Marshall believed that if Tom Bosley delivered that message with the same quiet sincerity that had defined Howard Cunningham for 11 years, the audience would not feel pulled out of the story. They would feel, for the first time, fully inside it. When the finale finally aired, the scene arrived late in the episode, after the major story beats had played out. Joni and Chachi were engaged. Fonzie had taken a major step in his own emotional journey. The Cunningham house was full of the noise and laughter and slightly controlled chaos that had always defined it. And then, in a moment of quiet that the episode had earned through everything that came before it, Howard Cunningham sat in the living room, and Tom Bosley looked into the camera. What followed was a short speech, carefully written, about the ordinary miracle of raising children and watching them grow into people capable of love and commitment. Howard didn't claim to have climbed mountains or written great novels. He spoke about the smaller achievements that don't make headlines but that make lives worth living. A family held together through years of change. Children who turned out well, friendships that lasted. And then he thanked the audience, not the fictional neighbors of the Cunninghams, but the real people sitting at home, for being part of the family, for being there week after week, year after year, through everything. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Viewers who expected the scene to feel gimmicky found themselves unexpectedly moved to tears. Critics who had predicted the fourth wall moment would destroy the finale's emotional coherence were forced to revise their assessments within days of the broadcast. Letters poured into the network and into the production offices. And the message in those letters was remarkably consistent. That final scene had not cheapened 11 years of storytelling. It had completed them. It had taken everything that Happy Days had always been trying to say about family and community and the ordinary beauty of a life lived with the people you love. And it had said it directly, clearly, and with perfect emotional honesty. For one night, a network sitcom had done something that very few television programs in history have managed to do. It made its farewell feel genuinely personal. Here is where the story turns from triumph to tragedy, and where the scene that should have taken Happy Days off the air for good became instead the first chapter of a disaster that the show never fully recovered from. ABC had, through a combination of reluctant creative trust and simple good fortune, allowed one of the most effective series finales in television history to air on May 8, 1984. The audience had responded exactly as Gary Marshall predicted they would. The cultural consensus was immediate. Happy Days had gone out at the top of an emotional game, with a farewell worthy of everything the show had meant to its viewers. Then the network remembered that it still had 5 unaired episodes sitting in a vault. These were not episodes that had been produced after a finale as some kind of supplementary content. They were episodes that had been filmed as part of the show's regular final season production schedule, but had been displaced from their intended broadcast dates by the network's coverage of the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo. ABC had secured the rights to broadcast the Olympics, and in clearing its prime-time schedule for nightly coverage of international competition, the network had pushed several episodes of its regular programming out of their usual slots. Happy Days, already in its final season, had been particularly affected. A handful of episodes that were meant to air in February of 1984 simply did not air in February of 1984 because there was no room for them. A television network with any real understanding of narrative and audience loyalty would have looked at those 5 displaced episodes and made a simple, obvious decision. Shelve them. The show had already aired its finale. Tom Bosley had already looked into the camera and thanked the audience for being part of the family. The story was over. Whatever value those 5 episodes might have had as entertainment when they were produced, they had lost that value the moment the finale aired. You cannot reopen a completed story without damaging it. The audience had already processed the ending, already made peace with the goodbye, already begun the slow, bittersweet work of letting go. To pull that goodbye back, to pop the Cunninghams back onto television screens as if nothing had ended, was not giving audiences more of something they loved. It was giving them a reason to doubt whether the thing they loved had ever been handled with the care it deserved. The first of the 5 post-finale episodes aired in early June of 1984, less than a month after the finale. The audience reaction was one of profound disorientation. People who had said their goodbyes, who had cried during Tom Bosley's speech, who had felt the particular bittersweet completeness of a long-running show signing off with grace and warmth, suddenly found that show back on their screens, as if it had never left. The Cunninghams were still in Milwaukee. Fonzie was still at Arnold's. Nothing had been resolved by the finale in any permanent way, because apparently nothing was final after all. Each successive episode deepened the damage. They were not bad episodes in isolation. Produced when they were intended for their original February broadcast slots, they would have been perfectly adequate installments of a long-running sitcom in its final season. But context is everything in storytelling, and the context in which these episodes aired transformed them from ordinary entertainment into something that felt actively hostile to the show's legacy. Viewers didn't experience them as bonus content. They experienced them as evidence that ABC had never taken shows ending seriously, that the emotional investment the audience had made over 11 years was, from the network perspective, simply a resource to be mined until it ran dry. The final episode to air, a story centered around Fonzie being subjected to initiation rituals by the lodge that Howard belonged to, was particularly damaging to the show's legacy, not because it was especially bad by sitcom standards, but because it was entirely ordinary. It had no weight. It had no intention of serving as an ending. It simply existed, doing the unremarkable things that middle-season sitcom episodes do. And then it stopped. That was the last image that millions of viewers had of Happy Days as an active broadcasting show. Not Tom Bosley's grateful farewell. Not the collective weight of 11 years of storytelling finding its natural conclusion, but a routine episode that ended because it ran out of footage, not because the story had reached its rightful close.